Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 12. I hope that you all had a great weekend. We had a crazy week last week as the entire nation was waiting for the election result. The wait was just crucial. I'm just glad that it's over. I hope that you had a great weekend and you're ready for new stuff to learn this week. We covered chapter 10 last week, and we're going to study chapter 12. Remember that to understand chapter 10 and chapter 12, you need to understand chapter 9. So definitely go back to chapter 9. Let me know if you have any question from chapter 9. Okay, so all those graphs, production, cost we had, as you probably also realize in chapter 10, we bring one part of those graphs and we put them when we talk about, for instance, profit maximization. When you want to find a profit, for instance, in perfect competition market in chapter 10, we use that average total cost, for instance, that we had, the marginal cost we had in chapter 10. Okay, so definitely study or review chapter 9 if you still don't understand what's going on. Okay, all right, so this week we're going to study chapter 12, which is about the monopoly market. You need to know the characteristics of monopoly. Remember, at the beginning of chapter 10 last week we learned about four important microeconomic markets we have, and we briefly talked about the characteristics of them. We're going to learn about the characteristics of monopoly one more time, and in kind of in depth in this chapter. And again, we're going to talk about profit maximization in short run in this market. If you remember, in chapter 10 we talked about shutdown case. We talked about how businesses basically maximize their profit in perfect competition in the short run, and we saw that not all the time they are able to make money, and every time that they have lost negative profit, they are going to think about shutdown case because of the short run. We're not going to talk about a shutdown case in this chapter, in chapter 12, and the reason is because of the type of market we're dealing with. Our monopolies basically always make money, so the profit is always positive. So there's no point of discussing the shutdown case. So in that sense, it's kind of shorter, this chapter, compared to chapter 10. But remember, to understand profit maximization, we still have that marginal benefit, marginal cost rule we had, where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. You need to know how to how we define marginal benefit, marginal cost again to understand chapter 10 and chapter 12. And of course, we learned how to calculate marginal benefit and marginal cost in chapter 10. So I would definitely suggest you guys review your notes from chapter 10, and I'm checking my notes from chapter 10 one more time before you start studying chapter 12. Okay, so no shutdown case. That's a good thing to know. You need to know that in this market, I like you basically to compare perfect competition with monopoly when you study this chapter. Okay, that's very important because if you want to put all these microeconomic market we had in chapter 10 on a spectrum, on one side of this spectrum we have perfect competition, and on the other side we have monopoly, and then in between we have monopolistic competition, and then we have oligopoly. Okay, so in a sense, perfect competition and monopoly are kind of, I'm not going to say the opposite, but they are kind of extreme. Okay, in chapter 10, perfect competition, it's a huge market, lots of buyers, lots of sellers. Okay, getting into the market is super duper easy. Businesses do not spend that much time advertising their products because the consumers are dealing with identical, very similar product. The 2% milk is 2% milk, so they're not going to really spend that much time um, um, recognizing a brand. There's no branding, unlike monopolistic competition, for instance, that we had in chapter 10. So but you'll see that in monopoly market in this chapter, things are very, very different. We're talking about a smaller market. We have one or maximum two, sometimes three only firms in the market, between one or two. I know your textbook says one, but the reality is that sometimes you have more than one firm in a monopoly market. Getting into the monopoly market, unlike perfect competition, is impossible. We studied the reasons behind this. We will study the reasons behind it in this chapter. You will see that unlike perfect competition, the market actually produces unique kind of product. We're talking about, let's say, your utilities, electricity, gas. These are unique products that we're talking about. Okay. But in perfect competition, as I said, we're talking about agricultural products. So apple is apple. Typically, consumers go for cheapest product in the market. Of course, you can argue, okay, I always, for instance, buy organic, but then you are a small fraction of consumers in this huge market. Okay. Monopoly market is not that huge. Getting into the market is not, it is impossible. I shouldn't even say it's not easy. It's impossible. The firms we have in monopoly are government owned or government regulated. That's another reason that you cannot get into this market easily. When it comes to monopoly, I know that people argue about fairness, definitely because the prices in the monopoly market are higher than perfect competition, if you kind of want to, again, compare these two markets. But remember, fairness is something that you can argue about monopoly market, but economically, as you study also in this chapter, economically speaking, having one firm or fewer firms in monopoly actually is economically beneficial. Okay. Why? Because starting a business in monopoly market is super duper expensive. So the initial cost of starting a business and starting producing something in monopoly is very, very expensive, and not everybody can afford it. Okay. The cost is pretty high. First of all, you should have, let's say you want to start a, I don't know, electricity company, okay, that generates power. So for you to build that company and start your own business, you should spend trillions of dollars. You should invest a lot of money to start it. If you have the entire market, then you are able to kind of cover your costs among all the users, all the consumers in the market, and kind of start making money. Okay, because again, the initial cost is super duper high. But if you bring 10 firms into that market, okay, first of all, each firm should pay that trillions of dollars to start a business. Now they are going to share all the consumers in the market. So each firm will get 1/10 of the consumers in the market. It's impossible for all of these firms to survive in this market because of the high cost they had. So it is not beneficial, economically beneficial for them to stay in business. Okay, again, I'm not talking about fairness. You can definitely argue that, okay, they're making tons of money. I'm with you, I understand, but I'm just explaining the economic behind monopoly. Okay. Okay. So we will talk about that, why this is one of the characteristics of monopoly. Also, one important thing that you need also to know about this market, that it's also different from competition, perfect competition, is that in perfect competition, we said that the demand for one firm is different from the market demand. If you remember, the market demand in perfect competition was downward slope, right? But since our firms and our producers, our businesses were price takers, because of the nature of the market, one buyer, one seller, remember, cannot impact the price. So our firms in this market, they were all price takers. So the demand for one firm was perfectly elastic. Remember, we had a horizontal demand for one firm. It was different. Demand for one firm was different from the market demand in chapter 10. Okay. And that was very, very important because we concluded in chapter 10 that price in this chapter, which is given, is always equal to marginal revenue and average revenue. It is not the same thing in chapter 12. It's not. Why? Because we have only one firm in this market, so the demand for this firm is the same as the market demand because we only have one firm in the entire market. So there is no difference between market demand and demand for one firm, unlike perfect competition. Makes sense? And we have a typical shape for demand, downward slope. All right. And we no longer have price equal marginal revenue, equal average revenue in monopoly market. They are not the same. Price is not the same as marginal revenue anymore, okay? The price is always bigger than marginal revenue, in fact, in monopoly market, all right? So there's no difference between, as I said, demand for one firm and market demand, all right? We will also talk about, so pay attention to that. We will also talk about, just like chapter 10, how our monopolies can maximize the profit, okay? And you will see that again, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we're still going to use that marginal revenue and marginal cost rule we had, which is basically the profit is max, or you can find the optimal quantity whenever the marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We also use it in chapter 10. Remember, in chapter 10, the only thing we were trying to find, and it was important to, and it's essential for businesses to figure out in the perfect competition market, is how much we should produce, because you cannot control the price as a business owner in perfect competition, because price is given. You are a price taker. You have to accept the price in the market, but you should make sure that you are producing the right amount of output. We found that right amount of output, or Q star, or optimal quantity, in chapter 10. One, using total revenue, total cost approach. You calculated the profit, TR, total revenue, minus TC, total cost. Then you found maximum profit. Wherever your profit was max, you looked at the quantity. That quantity was your optimal Q, okay? Or you could find that optimal quantity using marginal revenue and marginal cost. You calculated your marginal revenue, you calculated your marginal cost. Wherever your marginal revenue was equal to your marginal cost, your quantity again was optimal and your profit was maximum, okay? For monopoly market, I do not suggest that you use the first approach. Okay, the first approach is not that accurate in monopoly market, so do not calculate TR minus TC and then find your maximum profit. It doesn't work all the time. Okay, we typically use MRMC to find our optimal quantity. And remember, since the price is not given in monopoly market, you should also find, not calculate, but you should find also your optimal price. Why? Because another big difference between monopoly market and perfect competition is in the price. In perfect competition, you have to accept the price. You are a price taker. But in monopoly market, since the monopolies have lots of power, they can dictate the price. They are price makers, okay? So we were not really worried about price and perfect competition in chapter 10, but here in chapter 12 we should find both price and quantity. We only found quantity in chapter 10, but here in chapter 12 we should find also the price, okay? So going back to quantity, then I will talk about price. So to find this optimal quantity, we're going to use, again, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Calculate your marginal revenue, calculate your marginal cost. Again, you can have all the formulas for the final exam right in front of you. Just make sure you know how to use them, okay? So have some practice. Whenever the marginal revenue was equal to marginal cost, bam, your quantity is optimal, okay? How we can find the price now. We're going back to chapter 6. If you didn't understand chapter 6, the price elasticity of demand, definitely review chapter 6. At least that part, the price elasticity of demand. If you remember in chapter 6, when we talked about price elasticity of demand, we also talked about linear demand. And it was, I believe, one of the questions that you had in the second test, okay? Remember that when the demand is linear, what does it mean linear? It means it's just a straight line, okay? Because typically we don't have a linear demand. We typically kind of have a concave demand, okay? It's a curve, okay? But if your demand is linear, it's a straight line. For simplicity, of course, in our class, we always draw the linear demand, okay? So if your demand is linear, there's something unique about the linear demand. The price elasticity of demand changes along the linear demand. It's pretty high, the elasticity is big, and your linear demand basically is elastic at the higher price level. When the price is high, elasticity is greater than one. So your demand, the linear demand is elastic. But remember that the elasticity changes along this demand. Right in the middle of our linear demand, if you calculate the elasticity, your elasticity is 1. You have a unique elastic demand. And at the lower price level, your linear demand is inelastic. The elasticity is less than 1. Remember anything? If you don't, definitely review chapter 6, at least that part of chapter 6. So going back to where our monopolies choose the price, how they can find the price. Remember that we also have, if you pay attention to the shape of the demand in this market, the demand in this market is linear, okay? The demand for monopoly market is linear, all right? Our monopolies always pick the price at the elastic part of their demand. Why? Again, the answer is in chapter 6. Remember that we also talked about total revenue test. Remember anything? Total revenue test was about the relationship between price and total revenue. So if price and total revenue move in the same direction, demand was inelastic. If they move in the opposite direction, the demand is elastic. Remember, that was also one of the questions on the test 2, okay? If you don't remember, don't worry. Go back chapter 6, okay? So according to the total revenue, let's say there is a competitor in the market. There is a new firm in the monopoly market. Since our monopolists set their price at the elastic part of the linear demand, they are capable of reducing their price and still surviving in the market. They can cut their price and kick that new competitor out of the market. Because according to total revenue, when the demand is elastic, if you reduce the price, your total revenue will go up. Remember, price and total revenue move in the opposite direction. So nobody can compete with our firm, our one single firm in the market. That's why I always make money. Okay, so they never ever choose the price at the inelastic part of the demand, never ever. Okay, and that's one of the reasons that again, not many firms can get into the monopoly market. That you can add it probably to the list of the numbers we discussed at the beginning of this chapter. Okay, so that's how they find the price. Okay, pay attention to the graph. We probably have only one graph in this chapter. Definitely pay attention to the shape of the demand. You will see that since the marginal revenue is no longer equal to demand, we have also a downward slope marginal revenue. Remember, the marginal revenue is steeper than demand. Both of them are downward slope, but the marginal revenue is kind of steeper compared to the demand in this market, okay? Profit is always positive, so we're not going to talk about the shutdown case. They're not losing any money, okay? That's pretty much it. Do the assignments. We don't have any new discussion. The last discussion is due tonight, so do not miss it. I also told you last week that I'm trying to wrap up everything before Thanksgiving, and probably this is the biggest kind of chapter we have for this semester, chapter 12, the last big chapter, I should say. We're going to talk about chapter 13 next week, but as probably I mentioned it last week, we're not going to discuss every section in this chapter. I tried to keep it short, and even in terms of the questions that you will get on the test, final exam, I will give you more questions in terms of the characteristics of the market, oligopoly market, because I understand that you are not an econ major, and honestly, profit maximization in this market, in the oligopoly market, is something that we discuss in a separate course in econ, for econ majors, I mean. Or you will learn more in the more kind of advanced microeconomics. If you probably heard about game theory. So game theory is very, very related to this market. So that's why I really don't want you to be focused on profit maximization. Just know the characteristics of this chapter. I know I put it in the lecture notes, but I honestly will not ask much about profit maximization. I shouldn't say even much. I won't ask any question on profit maximization, but just know the characteristics of oligopoly market. So I will keep it short. Of course, I will. Oops, I dropped something. But I will. Okay, lots of papers. That's fine. Basically, the point I was trying to make was in terms of the course materials that we were supposed to cover for this semester, we're kind of done. Okay, this is kind of the major chapter, the last major chapter we have, chapter 12. Chapter 13 will be kind of short, and then it's Thanksgiving. Okay, I can't even believe that I'm saying Thanksgiving. I don't know even how we're in Thanksgiving at this point. I still feel like I'm in spring break. I don't know. It's just crazy. Everything has changed right after spring break. If you were a student, of course, last year. But anyway, yeah, just work on your papers, because your papers are due Friday. Remember, I know that all the deadlines are Monday. This is the only deadline you have, which is on a Friday, okay? Friday before Thanksgiving, 20th, November 20th, is the deadline for your term paper. So please don't tell me, oh, I thought it was Monday. No, it's not Monday, it's Friday, okay? And I explained it in my earlier emails of why the deadline is that, because I teach 5 classes and I need to have time to finish reading all of them during Thanksgiving break. What a fun Thanksgiving break that I have. But anyway, I'm fine. I love reading your papers. That's probably the fun part of honestly grading. I love the discussions, and I like the rest, of course, is just posting grades, but I love discussions, reading discussions, and the knowing because the discussions also allow me to know you kind of better. I don't see you in person, but I can at least see what's going on here, right? And I love reading papers because I learn a lot. So that's a fun part. So try to spend most of your time finishing up your papers. You will have time to study for the final. You have the week of Thanksgiving, as I told you last week, and the week after Thanksgiving for the final exam. So try to ace your papers, okay? Let me know if you have any questions. All right. So I kind of tried to tell you what's going on this week and in future weeks. So hopefully it's kind of helpful in terms of understanding where our class kind of is moving. And I hope that you have a great week. Stay safe. The numbers for the COVID is still going up. It's just crazy. Just take care of yourselves. All right. I'll see you soon, and have a great week. Let me know if you have any question. All right. Study hard. All right. Bye-bye.